So, final bit of the research method specification is answering 15 mark research design questions. Okay, so you're going to get one of these on the exam paper without question. Okay, so there will be a 15 mark question. As for the mock exams, I'm not going to put, or year 12 exams rather, I'm not going to put one of these on the paper. Okay, I'll give you different questions because you need time to practice them. But as time's short, and it's nice to have a bit of leeway in year 13, I want you to crack on with these, okay, and do a few examples, and we'll pick them up again after exams are over. So where this features, where you'll get a 15 mark question, is in section B, okay, which is all about research design. And what they will do is give you a novel source, so they'll give you a bit of context, and they will ask you to do certain things with that bit of information. Okay, so there'll be 4 bullet points that they'll want you to address in the design of that experiment. Now, those 4 points can be anything. Okay, it can take anything from anything on the spec and ask you the question about it. So you really do have to be sort of confident in your knowledge of the specification to do well. And also it's going to ask you to apply your practical work. Now, we've done about 2 or 3 practicals so far. We need to do a few more. But there's a way around this as well, which I'll talk about later in the presentation. So here's an example. Okay, so this is the context they're giving you. It's about conducting an experiment into the effects of playing video games. And those are the 4 bullets that they want you to address in your design. So lab or field, sometimes it gives you an option. Okay, it's asking you to do one or the other. Not all of them are like that. Okay, they'll just tell you the one that they want you to do. Experimental design. Okay, so which of the 3 would you use to design this experiment? And then the next one is the sampling method. So how are you going to get your sample and consider the ethics? Okay, and all of the questions will always have that bit at the end which asks you to use your own experience to justify why you're doing something in a certain way. Okay, so that catch-all phrase is on all of the questions that you're going to get. So, as I said earlier, those 4 required features could come from anything. It could be about the sample, it could be about the research method, it could be about the experimental design. It might ask you to put some controls in. It might be about ethics. It might even be how you would analyse your data. Okay, so it might draw on your knowledge of statistics. So you have to be prepared to expect anything, okay, on this particular question. So how do you do well? Okay, you have a 4-point plan that you have to stick to. Okay, so 4 bullet points, 4 things that you need to say about those bullets. And if you can do this, there's nothing to stop you getting the full sweep of marks on this question. So what you have to do is, firstly, you have to address that bullet. Okay, I'll talk about that in a second. Secondly, you need to justify your design decision. Okay, so why you're doing it that way, what would be a strength of doing it in a particular way, or maybe a weakness of an alternative method. You then need to contextualize your answer. Okay, so you have to explain how you're going to do it in context of the question, which I'll explain in a second. And you have to finally explicitly link your decision to your own practical work. Okay, so you do all those 4 bullets, you don't do anything else, because if you start to do anything else, you're going to compromise marks. So let's look at these in a bit more detail. So what do we mean by addressing all the required features? It's exactly what you do as it says on the tin. If it's asking to do a research design, you do a research design. Okay, so addressing it directly, even if you don't say much about it, earns marks. Okay, if you start to diverse, diversify, okay, from that question, then you're going to lose marks, okay? So you're going to compromise, as it says there. For example, if you only include 3 of the 4 features, the maximum you could score is 8 out of 15, okay? So that's a costly mistake to make. So don't go off piste, okay? Stick to the bullets. Don't put in things that are not being asked for. You're wasting time. You're losing marks if you do this. So the second bit is justifying your design decision. So what you have to do is explain why you're doing something. Okay, so you're going to identify a strength of doing it in a particular way, or even a weakness of doing it in a different way. Yeah, so there's some examples there. So if we use the first one, I would use a field experiment. Because it has a higher ecological validity than a lab study. Therefore, I can generalise my findings to the real world. So that's a clear strength there as to why you would use a field experiment. Okay, you've justified why you're going to do it. You might decide to do a lab experiment. Yeah, so I would use a lab experiment because what you're doing here is explaining the weakness of the alternative method is that field studies have low levels of control. And may be influenced by confounding variables. Okay, so there's different ways of answering this second point. So it's either a strength of your method, so you need to know your staff, or it's a weakness of alternatives. Okay, so you've identified what you're going to do, you've justified why you're going to do it. The next bit is context is king, as always. Okay, so you have to contextualize your answer. So even if you've made a spectacular answer, okay, so far you're really feeling confident about your design decisions, you have to put it into context. Okay, so you need to use that blurb at the start of the question and put it in your answer to say exactly how you're going to do it. Okay, so here's an example. Yeah, so this one's on sampling. Okay, so they're saying that they're going to do random sampling, so they've identified the bullet, and they've put the context in, so I've highlighted it in blue. Yeah, so I would obtain my sample by using random sampling. I would obtain all the names of the members from the Gaming Society at college. Okay, they would be my target population. I put their names in a hat. And the first 20 to be chosen would be my participants. Furthermore, I would then put all the names of the psychology students at college in a hat and choose from them. So they would be the control group. Yeah. They then go on to sort of justify why they're doing random sampling. So random sampling is the best sampling method. It's not biased as everyone has an equal chance of being selected, etc., etc. Okay, so if you produce that in the exam, that would really impress an examiner because you've got 3 of the 4 bullet points that you need. You've identified your feature, you've explained why you're doing it in that way, why you're doing random sampling, what the strengths of it is, and you've got context as to how you would do that random sampling in the question. You don't have to say a lot, as it says there. Okay, it's not a great deal of information, but there's clear context. Okay, so we're nearly there. The final bit, and this is the bit probably students find hardest, what you finally have to do is then link it to previous research that you've done yourself. Okay, now this is where it's tricky because I haven't got loads of time to set you lots of practical work. We will be doing more. Okay, so we'll do some more in the summer term and we'll do some more in year 13. But take it from me, okay, if you can't think of practical experience that you've done, then you just make it up. Okay, and I'm going to attach to this presentation a document of examples that you could use to answer this question. Okay, so you can be creative. You can say that you've done a study in a particular way even though you haven't done it. Okay, so don't worry too much about this. We will do more on it, but it's an easy one to fix. Okay, so you just need to be creative if you can't think of how you've done a previous experiment. Okay, so for example, there's an example. which I'm not going to go and read through. You can have a look at it in the presentation later, okay, when you're doing your lesson. There is a missing part of this particular question. They've missed something out. I'm going to ask you to identify what that is. Okay, so they've got 3 of the 4 things that you need to do. But as you can see there, they've made a link to previous experience about where it worked for them and why they're doing it. Another way that you can do it is perhaps if you did it a different way and it didn't quite work out. Yeah, so maybe that you did a field experiment, found that you had lots of extraneous variables. That's also acceptable. Yeah, so you just link it to some kind of previous study that you've done in order to justify your design decision. Okay, so the student there is talking about that they did an experiment into word length. Okay, everything else was controlled and standardized. So as a result of doing it that way, as it says at the end, they felt confident that the IV was causing a change to the DV. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you to do over the next 2 lessons is I'm going to give you an example. You need to get your highlighter pen out, okay, and you need to highlight in the example that I give you, where is the student addressing the feature, where are they using context, where are they justifying, okay, and where have they linked it to previous experience. Okay, you haven't got to stick to those colours, choose your own if you want to, but this is just a suggestion how you're going to do it. And then I'm going to give you an example to have a go at. Okay, so there's the example there that I'd like you to attempt yourself. And I'll put this all in an email to you with all the information, and you just need to sort of do 2 hours worth of work on this, and we'll pick it up later. Okay, we've not quite finished. I'm not going to be setting you any more work after this week because you need to focus on revision, obviously. So we'll pick up these 15 markers at a later date.